The moon is high in the balmy night sky when dispatchers in Starkville get an emergency call from local resident, 81-year-old Kathryn Crigler.
What's the problem, man?
Well, this tonight is not a terrible thing. There was one single young man, and he went in the front room where my friend was sleeping, and he came back in with his hands all bloody. And then he raped me.
Kathryn Crigler clings to life as her friend in the room next door succumbs to her injuries.
I know I did. It's just terrible.
You know where this man went?
You know, he's been gone. He kept threatening me that he was going to cut me up like my friend.
Okay, man, that's all right. They're on the way. We're sending an ambulance too, okay?
Yeah, you better. I'm so tired.
I got the call to come down to Miss Crigler's house on 82 Highway, and that Miss Crigler and Betty Jones were there. When I arrived, Miss Crigler was not there. She had been transported to the hospital. Betty, she was in the house. I went in. The baseball game was still playing when I arrived. That's where the TV was, in the living room, and that's where Betty's body was. Betty died from a knife wound to the throat, and it was bloody, and it was a brutal killing. This one would rank up with some of the worst that I've ever seen.
Investigators examine the crime scene. They piece together what happened earlier that night.
There was a knock at the door, and Betty Jones went to the door. She opened the door, and once she opened the door, the person on the other side came in and immediately attacked her. He stabbed her. He then proceeded to another area of the house, which is where Kathryn Crigler was. She was in a wheelchair. The perpetrator then finds her and proceeds to rape her.
When Kathryn wakes, the killer is gone, apparently leaving her for dead.
She was able to somehow crawl to a telephone in another part of the house, call 911 to beg for help. There was other evidence collected. There were fingerprints. The suspect apparently left a cigarette packaging there. The specific brand were only sold at 2 stores in town.
At the hospital, evidence is collected from Kathryn.
In 1990, investigators collected this evidence, this rape kit. There was nothing they could do with it at that time, but someone had some foresight to know that this evidence might lead to something someday.
Despite her life-threatening injuries, Kathryn is still able to give detectives critical information about her attacker.
She told them that it was a white male.
She said he had blue eyes, swarthy complexion, and dirty blonde hair. We put out a drawing of what we thought. Miss Crigler told us. She gave a good description.
Investigators soon begin an intensive search for suspects.
We had such a small amount of DNA that we didn't have enough to work the case.
2 months after Betty's murder, Kathryn also passes away. 3 years into the investigation, the case is also featured on a popular true crime series.
That's when America's Most Wanted became involved. It got several phone calls, but nothing really panned out.
But then the tips stop coming into the Starkville PD, and the investigation into the Labor Day murder slows like the waters of the Mississippi River, and the case goes cold.
In 2004, approximately 14 years later, I take over the Labor Day murder case.
Detective Lott takes another look at the evidence saved from the original investigation.
As far as the prints, all fingerprints that were taken at the scene were sent to the crime lab, but no suspects were ever able to be developed from those fingerprints. science was evolving, and I knew DNA was evolving. We tried on some of the cigarettes and never got a DNA profile, and it's quite obvious the reason we didn't was because it was packaged in plastic.
But the evidence from Kathryn's assault kit is properly stored and unaffected by moisture.
It's all preserved in cardboard boxes and stuff, and there's blood vials and all that. And I'm like, man, if we could just get this profile developed on this sexual assault kit, we have a good, strong piece of evidence.
In 2005, the Starkville Police Department sent the sexual assault kit from Miss Crigler to Scales Biological Laboratory. The evidence collection back in 1990 was done properly, and the DNA was preserved.
I get a call. They got a semen-based DNA profile. And I said, holy crap, well, that's direct evidence from the suspect. When you're talking blonde hair and blue eyes and tan, that's not an unusual thing in Mississippi. So we went through those as well.
The sample that was collected from Miss Crigler's sexual assault kit was uploaded into CODIS, which is the National DNA Index System. But however, there were no hits.
The case stalls once again.
I knew I couldn't quit. I had to wait for the science. So continue on working. And I'm reading and learning about genetic genealogy.
DNA profile from the Crigler-Jones case failed to match any DNA samples that were in the Mississippi or the national database. But for genetic genealogy, we widen the net of any potential DNA matches. If you are able to make an association between a sample and someone that's in a genetic genealogy database, then they could work back and create a family tree to potentially identify a suspect.
Forensic genealogists set to work. Just 3 months later, they hit pay dirt.
When the genealogists did their work, there's potentially 2 brothers. One was a fairly well-to-do, successful businessman. The other one had a couple of run-ins with the law. Naturally, law enforcement's going to start at least with the person who's had the run-ins with the law. When they came up with the name Michael Devon, this was someone who appeared to be a promising match.
Police discover 51-year-old Michael Devon lives 100 miles outside of Starkville, near the town of Boonville. They find little else.
As far as criminal databases, there was not a lot in there about him.
This was someone who was never on detectives' radar.
That is, until Devon is arrested on a drug charge in June 2018.
The results show that his DNA profile is a match.
Before making an arrest, Detective Lott and his partner plan to confront the suspect.
And I said, we're going to interview him. Let's try and get him to confess and own up to what he did and give us a motive. We know this is the guy.
Okay, we're obviously here for a reason. We know what you did back there in your 20s in Starkville. It's 100% that you did, and we have the physical evidence.
Yes, sir. I know this day was coming. I've been expecting it a lot sooner than what is here now.
Mm-hmm.
You say you know what went on and what happened?
Yeah.
Well, I think now's when I want to tell you that I don't want to say nothing else.
Michael Devon is charged with both capital murder and sexual assault. He faces the possibility of death.
The day we had the press conference, it was not planned, but that was the 93rd birthday of Betty.
There's Betty, one out of birthday cake.
I know I cried during that press conference, but I'm not ashamed of that. It was a good day.
Before Devon faces the jury of his peers, he decides to cut a deal.
He was willing to plead to the charges to avoid the death penalty.
Devon is sentenced to life without parole. To the frustration of the victims' families, he never explains why he committed the terrible crimes.